Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Solidarity Live. I am here, as always, with Alex, and we're here to get angry about things worth getting angry about. How are you doing this morning, Alex?
Well, it's Friday, which doesn't mean much because every day is the same as the last during the pandemic. But there's a bit more rage today than other Fridays. And we can sort of get into that of the latest failures of Washington, D.C. But first, I want to introduce our guest today, Peter Maybarduk, who's the director of the Access for Medicines Project at Public Citizen. He's here to tell us a bit about why there is a man-made shortage of a drug that we, the taxpayers, paid for. And Gilead, the pharmaceutical company, thinks it's their right to profit off of. And what that means is that hospital beds right now are filling up and doctors do not have access to a drug, Remdesivir, that could help alleviate those hospital bed shortages. So we'll start right off with rage. It's just going to be corporate rage first, and then the failures of Washington, D.C., and they kind of mix together. With that introduction, Peter, thank you so much for joining us here on Solidarity Live.
Good to be here with you guys.
So tell us a little bit. You heard my setup. You think that's fair? And, are there any latest developments on what we're talking about with this drug, Remdesivir?
Yeah, so Gilead is a corporation out of California that has monopoly control over the first emergency authorized treatment against COVID-19. Remdesivir is proven so far to reduce the length of hospital stays, which is pretty important to keeping our pandemic response under control and making sure hospitals have the resources they need to help us through the pandemic. But since it is monopoly controlled, there are limits on how much can be produced. It's just whatever Gilead wants to produce, has capacity to produce, or has signed contracts to facilitate extra production of, in Gilead's sole discretion. And so there are shortages now in much of the country, and we've been documenting this, and we'll be coming out with a report soon. A number of hospitals in a number of states simply don't have what they need to treat patients, and they can't plan for the future because their requests to obtain more Remdesivir from Gilead or from the federal government have been denied. It's also a global problem where even though the supply is very limited, the US government is buying up 90% of the supply from Gilead so far. So it means many countries around the world simply don't have access to this drug. And that's a pretty serious problem, and it's a pretty significant outrage given that taxpayers paid $70 million to help develop this drug at a minimum. Federal scientists were involved at every step along the way. The story you may hear from sort of Gilead is about what great revolutionary science they've done, but really, you, me, we the people have funded and pioneered this science from day one.
And Peter, this isn't new. What's happening right now, it's exacerbated by the pandemic, but you have done so much work, and Public Citizen has done so much work with this cycle that plays out with other pharmaceutical companies. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, monopoly control is that is how we structure the pharmaceutical market, which is a terrible mistake. So the government gives pharmaceutical companies patents and other exclusivities to control supply and price and make decisions about how much medicine they're going to provide and at what price. And of course, in the United States, largely, we don't even negotiate with the monopolists to bring prices down. So they've got us over a barrel, but we've been going willingly into that.
I'd say we built the barrel as well, right? We literally developed the drug. In many cases, it's actually the whole thing from start to finish. And then we just hand it to a company and are like, charge us whatever you want.
Yeah,
make sure some people can't afford it.
As far as we can tell, almost every drug that's been newly brought to market has benefited from federal funding in its development at some point. And in many cases, the government actually co-owns patents, or was sort of like instrumental in the moment of invention of the key technologies. Now in the pandemic, it's even more extreme because the people are funding clinical trials. BARDA, the US government agency, is giving out hundreds of millions of dollars apiece to the major pharmaceutical corporations to facilitate their vaccine manufacturing operations. So the investment really is ours, and we should have a much stronger say than we do, and how these technologies are commercialized, at what price, and so on. The other thing that's really tough about the pandemic is supply. Ordinarily, a group like ours focuses on price, focuses on how monopoly pricing leads to treatment rationing, because corporations actually find they make more money selling at high prices to the few than affordable prices to the many, which is no corporation manufactures at scale to supply the entire world. And so there is rationing, and so there are shortages. We're already seeing it with Remdesivir. Of course, we've seen it with ventilators and protective equipment. But the real nightmare scenario is what happens once there is finally a or more than one safe and effective vaccine, and yet we're nowhere near at scale to get it to everybody who needs it. I mean, globally, it could be years between the time the first people get a vaccine and the time the world's poorest people get a vaccine. And that's going to be devastating for communities, for people's lives, for inequality. Now, we can do something about it, because since we give the monopolies, we can take them away, and we can authorize competition for any of these drugs anytime, generally speaking. And, there's like space between a...
Let me ask a question on that.
Yeah.
Because I want to set it up in this way. You and me, and our organizations and a whole community have been trying to get everyone to understand, like, the way we're doing things is super dumb, and it's just leading to harm. It hurts us. We pay for it, then we give it away. And then they charge us prices that we can't afford. We hold up insulin often as, the case where you're hearing about people dying because they're rationing their insulin, which the drug is over 100 years old, and the analogs are from the 90s. They haven't changed at all, but the price goes up every single year. And then we say, but there's a different way. We don't need to give the monopoly to this company. We could let generics produce all of the drugs that we want. Like, we could have companies, they could actually compete producing these different drugs, and there'd be no monopoly. There'd be no non-generic version of it. Or, if that was a little bit too much, you could just hit the highest offenders and say, okay, well, insulin, we need to take the monopoly away. And by doing that, other companies would stop acting so poorly. But for a long time, that has been sort of, it's resided in our world, policy world, technocratic world. And globally, though, it's like everyone believes this. It's just in America that it's really been polarized like this. But 2 days ago, something I think really remarkable happened that I want you to talk about, which is 34 attorneys general, which is a weird plural. I can never get that one right. Attorneys general, 34 of them, representing 60% of the population in this country, sent a letter that mirrors what we've been saying for years. Talk a little bit just about like the eye-openingness of that.
Yeah, so they've got it exactly right. And so 2/3 of the states, right, and 10 Republicans, state attorneys general, by the way, came out to say the federal government already has the power under existing law to end this supply problem, to end the rationing by authorizing competition with Gilead's patented drug. You can bring generics online, and we can start buying from generics producers and don't have to be stuck and tied to Gilead. So that's kind of a watershed moment, and we hope that's going to make a pretty significant difference. You've got the letters led by Becerra out of California and Landry out of Louisiana, a Democrat and a Republican, and they are writing to Secretary Azar and the FDA commissioner saying, we know you have the power, give us the drugs. All you've got to do is exercise your power under existing law. And so, yeah, it's pretty powerful, and it's going to be exciting to see what comes in the days ahead if we can finally change the monopoly politics of pharma.
Well, and it seems to me that maybe organizers have been saying this about COVID-19 since it started. This could be an opportunity for people to really realize how bad this process is. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It should be a war zone, watershed moment, all hands on deck. Instead, we're arguing about how much the treatment costs. Is it really frustrating for you to be in this fight for so long and see it just not? Because I think the majority of Americans don't really realize how bad this is.
Yeah, I think the majority of Americans agree with us, and sort of want this to change. And the problem is that, well, what is really frustrating is the hesitance, the reticence, the complicity and complacency of our leaders standing up to pharma. Like they just, they've had such a hard time doing it in both parties.
You used a few C words, but not corruption.
Yeah,
so
well,
I'll throw that one in there because it is a corrupt process.
They spend a ton of money on our elections. They've got more than 2 lobbyists for every member of Congress, statistically. So that part is frustrating. That part endures. And that's part of what's so exciting about this letter is that it's state AGs, at least, are saying we're not going to be beholden to pharma that way. If we look at the national and global politics, still politics out of Washington so far, it really is the missing piece, the willingness to stand up to pharma. Governments are starting to put up real money to fund research and development. There are at least some, not the big orange in the White House, but there are some that want to take global cooperation seriously, but very few that are really saying we actually have to knock corporate heads together if we are going to transfer the technology, if we're going to make these goods, belong to the people. All the medical tools, we're funding them. They should belong to the people. Companies should be able to manufacture them around the globe so that there's enough supply, so that there's an affordable price. But we're just gotten sort of really beholden to this monopoly business model.
A lot of the work that we do, I think, is, I know, Peter, for example, you focus a lot on global access as well as access here in the United States. And it's driven by a sort of, wow, this is super unfair. This is an unfair thing that people are dying because they can't afford a drug that literally costs pennies to produce. Remdesivir, I think, it costs around $10 and they're selling it for around, I think, $3,000.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just total garbage. And I want everyone to be outraged at that and the unfairness of it and all of that. But I also want you to speak a little bit about how in this moment for this pandemic, you can even be okay with being unfair. This is just about there's only one way that we can stop the pandemic, and it's to break out of this monopoly-driven mold, because there will never be enough supply. There will never be enough sharing of data and everything that we need to have the global cooperation that will be necessary to arrest a global viral pandemic. This isn't just a matter of, like hippies wanting to say this is the nicer thing to do. This is the only way that we're going to stop a pandemic. And this is also not new. We've done this before. Global cooperation is what we used to do when we defeated diseases like smallpox, like polio. But you cannot defeat a global pandemic if companies see the treatment or the vaccine as a profit maker for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of space in between them. We'd be willing. This is just a moment where, like, yes, we can pay for these treatments, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be Robin Hood, whatever. But there's got to be an alternative to monopoly, because monopoly means rationing, and so under what the AGs and others are promoting, you can pay royalty payments back to the companies. There's some compensation or whatever. If we're paying higher prices than we should, we'll still fight it. But that's, as you say, this is a problem that is an order of magnitude greater. This is like, what is the path out of the pandemic? What do the world's poorest people do? What do vulnerable Americans do if there just aren't medical tools in the first place? And we are going to have to get a lot tougher on big pharma if we want that to change.
Oh, this is really dark stuff, guys. We
Jocelyn,
should be
sign us out of the interview on a hopeful note. Find the
Oh,
hopeful note
sorry, my
in all of
bad.
this.
Are we listening to the same
Everything's
conversation?
on fire. All
However,
houses are burning. You can't just put out your house fire if your neighbor's house
yes,
is also on fire.
exactly.
It's
And
bleakness as far as the eye can see. Now, Jocelyn, please find us the light in that.
that wasn't very hopeful, but Peter, you are a very confidence-inspiring individual. This Attorney General letter sounds like a hopeful thing. I think that I will say the hopeful thing for me is that I have seen for sure a shift in public opinion. I mean, we all have over the past few months about things like how comfortable should pharma execs be? How serious should we be about things like single payer healthcare? And I am hoping my positive take, Alex, is that this does become an organizing moment for people to really see the systemic problems with the ways we've been doing medical business for decades now. This shouldn't be a business. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Everyone is dying. That should be way more important than yachts. I mean, do you agree with
It's a
that?
really clear case of people power versus corporate power. I actually think, the people understand this perfectly well. And basically, no matter how you ask the question, at least 3 and 4 are going to tell you it's wrong how pharma does business and we need to end their monopoly control. And now we have an opportunity to do that. And the reason it hasn't changed so far is because pharma is all paid up in Washington, right? But that can change now. And the state attorneys general standing up is a really big step in that direction. So of course, over at Public Citizen and with Social Security Works and a number of other of our partners, we're going to be campaigning on this nationwide. And you're going to be hearing from us to end the monopoly on Remdesivir. Let's lift up what the state attorneys general are doing. So if you want to be a part of that, stay in touch with Social Security Works. We'll make it happen together.
Peter, so before I let you go, I know you're a very busy person, apparently. What can people do to support Public Citizen, Social Security? Yeah, it's cute.
That's the busyness right there. There's that crib.
Yeah, there's an infant in that crib for people who didn't catch that. What can people do to get involved and help?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure what's our best way to get in touch. Alex can drop them there, but we are going to be running. So there's a Make Medicines Work campaign, for example, with affiliates around the country that's going to be running demonstrations on this and related issues. And we'd love for you to connect up with the chapter, get out in the streets if you're comfortable with that, if you can find a way to do it safely, or join us online, because we'll be holding more events like this, participatory events like this, where you can demand of your local elected officials, for example, that they sign on to these requests.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Peter. And as always, Jocelyn, no matter how bleak the everything's on fire metaphor is, we know what the answer is. That's why we do our show. It's solidarity.
Solidarity, yeah.
It's when people stand together, our voices can't be ignored. And I think what Peter was talking about is a perfect example of how we can move forward on this. We look at one issue, Remdesivir. This isn't a silver bullet type drug. It actually is not a cure or anything like that. But the shortages on this non-silver bullet drug are just, it's just a precursor for what's going to happen when we get something that really does work, or the vaccine. And hopefully we will have a vaccine that does work. But if we don't demand now together, then it will literally fail, because the vaccine will only work if it is for the people. If we let it be for the few, then it will fail.
And I think it's what this sounds to me like a really important moment to set this precedent for, like Peter was saying, with when we do have a vaccine. And it's so funny, at the beginning of this, there was all this pie in the sky thinking like, all we need is a vaccine. Okay, but then you have to distribute it. You have to get it to people. And, oh, that's right, we're now a country that doesn't believe in vaccines for some reason, because autism or something. It's this whole trickle down of crazy that we are now having to deal with, where we should only be focused on having the science to heal people. And instead, there are about 50 capitalistic obstacles we have to go through. It's nuts.
And
Was
then
it negative?
then the truth is that a pandemic of this size, this severity, would be incredibly difficult to deal with, even if we did everything correct.
Right,
But
exactly.
we've literally done nothing correct. So there's no way that the US can lead the response. Germany has done close to everything correct. If you want a country that's done very well, South Korea, another one that's done extremely well. But here we've failed this test. We've failed the pandemic test. And I will actually say that, you know, having studied this when I was getting my master's, pandemics specifically, because I was working in HIV clinics at the time, which is also a pandemic. The COVID pandemic is actually like not, it's very severe, but the ones that we study are much worse.
Yes.
What is going to happen? The next pandemic, which will occur, could be orders of magnitude worse than what we're in right now. And so we need to judge ourselves, our country's response, incredibly harshly, because we have failed this test. And if we fail, we're just lucky that this wasn't a species ender. It could be a species ender. Zoonotic diseases that cross the species barrier, and then no one has immunity. That's what novel coronavirus is. They can kill all humans. There's pathogens that people look at, and if they crossed and became a pandemic, it could kill all humans. And if that were bubbling out, and you know, the U.S. response was to have our president pushing bunk science, and you know, a quote unquote doctor who believes in dream demons, or whatever it was the other week, and people are
Sorry, it's not funny, but I mean, what are
it's
you
not funny, haha, but it's funny. It's funny because otherwise we'd all cry, because the dumbness of the debate that we're having. People are fighting over whether to wear masks. We're lucky that masks work. Everyone should be like,
Yes.
oh man, are we lucky
Yes.
that a piece of cloth over your face actually could arrest this pandemic, the US epidemic. But instead, people have turned it into a political thing, and are like pointedly not wearing masks.
Well, the middle class, the upper middle class, I should say, because the working class in America has been suffering for quite some time now. But the upper middle class in America has been damned by their own prosperity, and we have been so comfortable in this country for a period enough to where the facts that are clearly playing out, whether you're talking about COVID or climate change or the realities of healthcare costs in America, they just seem too bad to be true for a lot of people. So they choose to create this collective dissociation where, well, it's not real. I don't know anyone who's died of COVID. It's like, okay, I also don't believe people at this point, because I personally know about 15 people who've had COVID in a serious way. And not in a serious way like, oh, they had a bad couple weeks. Like, they are still recovering from it months later. So when I hear these people say that, maybe it's possible. Maybe they live in a small rural area where it's not as prevalent. But it seems to me that it's more the case we have this politically enforced cultural trend towards just running from reality in America. And that has started at the top, because that dissociation makes a lot of people a lot of money. When did this start, Alex? It's nutso.
Well, I mean, it's the Powell memo in the 70s is actually that's the starter gun of what we're seeing when the corporations wanted, they were scared at what was happening, that people were winning, that people power was like, hey, let's not let the companies poison our water,
Right.
and dump toxic waste into our aquifers. And the corporations were like, whoa, wait a minute. How am I going to make oodles of money if I'm not able to kill your family with abandon? And so they came up with a political strategy to capture our political system. And when you have the extractive industries whose business model is literally to destroy the world, that
Right.
is what they are doing. And, you know, they can't actually fight fairly because
No.
sustainable energy wins every time without the massive subsidies that we give to the oil companies and coal and nuclear, which isn't quite extractive, it's just stupid. None of them make economic sense because it's our money. Again, we pay for these companies to make profits and destroy our stuff. If a company destroys the Gulf of Mexico, that company should no longer exist.
100%.
But instead, everyone's like, oh, well, what could they have done? And you're like, a lot of things, a lot of things. I've never heard of a wind power farm destroying all of the fish anywhere. And we need to understand that the extractive industries dumbed down the discourse around climate change and created a perfect storm where they said, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears, and definitely don't believe your experts. Instead, believe my slick PR guy that everything's fine. Nothing, don't listen to the people who say just because it was 90 degrees in Antarctica that's like a problem, because that's just alarmism. And they really sickened people. People's brains are not able to comprehend that expertise should be listened to. And we have these massive propaganda arms at Fox and others and Sinclair, who are just hitting people just day in, day out with these distortion. But it's for profit. It's a profitable thing to dumb people down. But now we're reaping what we've sown, right? Like now, I think even the corporations, the corporate masters are like, wait a minute, we should probably get this pandemic under control. Otherwise, the whole thing is going kaput. But people aren't listening anymore. That's what happens.
Well, and this is the thing. As you're talking, all I keep thinking is like, okay, with our vast amounts of free time, Alex, I think we have to start a moral revolution too, because this really does start with the psychological worship of money in this country. I'm thinking about some people I know who annoy me, who are like, oh yeah, just like if you like hustle, boss girl, entrepreneur, make a ton of money. Yeah, that's the problem. People are working at these companies, and these companies are run by people who want to make massive amounts of money because that is the moral indicator we have accepted in the land of white Jesus. And then become totally dissociated from the fact, okay, if you're destroying the world, if millions of people are diagnosed with a preventable disease, this model probably isn't working, and you should feel bad about yourself. You should feel morally bad about yourself. And I'm pretty sure even white Jesus would say you're going to hell. This isn't how it's supposed to look. Also, how much money do you need to make? I feel like once you can support your family and maybe have a nice little beach cabin, you're tapped out. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, though?
You definitely don't need enough money that the median income, a person working for the median income, it would take them over 4 million years, which is what Jeff Bezos has. So
my God.
These are the outrageous, it's a sickness that this accumulation of wealth, it's a sickness that people have. And because it's our show, I want to bring up a book, which I think is really, it is a great read. I don't love everything that Michael Lewis writes, but if you haven't read Liar's Poker, I think everyone should read it. And there's one part in it that really just explains Wall Street and the greedy liars on Wall Street and how the whole system works. Because people think that money in capitalism aligns the incentives, but it doesn't. It oftentimes misaligns the incentives. So Michael
Okay.
Lewis was selling bonds, corporate bonds, on Wall Street, and he was like 20 something. And so they sit him down and they're like, hey, yeah, try to sell these bonds. And I can't remember all the specifics. I think it was Xerox or something, but it was corporate debt. And he called around. He was trying to sell it. And, you know, he's telling the people who he's trying to sell this stuff to, like, oh, this is great stuff. You know, this is a solid corporation and da-da-da-da-da. He's selling it, pitching it like this is a good investment. And someone buys it. A bank, you know, buys this stuff. And he, you know, makes the deal, closes up, and it goes out over this loudspeaker that he just closed this deal. And everyone goes to his desk and they're like, I can't believe that you sold that garbage. That's the most worthless debt that there is. You did such a good job. How did you get them to believe? And they were all congratulating him. And he talks about the feeling of being like, wait, I thought they would, and he's confused and everything. And then he gets a $250,000 check. And, you know, his salary, and he's like, that's how it works, because people are like, wait, if I'm getting paid this much money to do it, it can't be wrong. And you're like, no.
It
probably is wrong. If you're 20 something years old, coming out of business school, selling some garbage numbers on a piece of paper and making that much money without doing anything, you're probably part of a cartel that is destroying the world for money. And you should recognize that.
Well, and I used to be really close to someone who had a similar job in his early 20s. And the stories he told me were just out of control. And he made like $500,000 as a 24-year-old. How do you do that in an honest way? You don't. And while we're on the book, should I get that Liar's Poker? Should I get that book?
Liar's Poker is great. It also, you read it, it's super fast read.
That sounds okay. So there's a similar book. It's called Liquidated by Karen Ho, and she's an anthropologist who decided, okay, I'm going to write a case study of these douchebag Wall Street firms. And she goes to one, and the book is fascinating because she's an anthropologist. She's talking about the culture. She's not like a progressive activist with an axe to grind like I would be. No, she's like just saying this place is bonkers. Everybody knows it's fraud. Nobody cares because everybody is in it for the massive amount of material and social capital. And this is something that we cannot not talk about. We view the world of finance as this like glamorous, edgy thing. These people, and she writes about this, these finance firms set up on Ivy League campuses the way army recruiters set up in poor neighborhoods, because they're building on social and cultural cachet and power, and they don't do anything. They actively destroy shit. So it's like, you know, this is not mom and pop capitalism. This is a bunch of frat boys plundering the world for millions and billions of dollars, and we let it happen and call it the way things are. I am very tired of this. I don't like it.
And it's policy choices. You know,
totally.
We allow this. We not only allow it, we created the system that forces it to happen. You know, in the 80s till now. But I want to, for all the frat bros who watch our show, which I'm sure there's a lot,
single.
There's this thing that I don't think people fully get about Wall Street either, which is that it's a hustle on them. So what the system actually selects 100%. for psychopathy or sociopathy. And so what they do is they hire a bunch of 20-year-olds, like tons and tons of them, and they work them 80, 90 hour a week, and they just throw them into the system to just squeeze it, and they throw money at them. But when it comes time to move up, they only half of them move up, and they move up with a quarter of the money of the people who just got axed. And each step of the way, it goes that way. And it is actually a giant pyramid that goes up to a very, very small number of people who are at the top. and
Right.
they do nothing. They actually exploit the exploiters. It's just a giant system of sucking wealth out of things that actually create wealth, which there's only one thing: labor.
Well, and it's I always say this, Wall Street is the most violent pyramid scheme in the history of
exactly.
and you bring this up. So my friend, I'll share his story because I think it's really interesting. He graduated from a really good top tier school from I'm not going to say poor background, but definitely looked at this as like, wow, this is my big break. And it's exactly what you're talking about. He was a 23-year-old. He made a ton of money. They work 100 hours in a vicious, competitive, sociopathic work environment. And he just had a nervous breakdown and left. And that is on purpose. This isn't like that was his story. That is the culture of these places because they are relying on creating a vulture class. These are people who promote psychopathology. So then you have these people lobbying Congress and making laws which allow them to continue their violent MLM of death. And the rest of us, people with normal jobs, teachers, journalists, doctors, even lawyers, even people that we think of as like elite professionals, are still functioning at just a completely different level of how we process work and how we process resources. And so you have this massive disconnect because you have, upper middle class lawyer in a normal town being like, well, perhaps Wall Street does do something. Like, no, they don't. They don't work.
I can't remember. There's a paper on it. And I'll find the specifics and bring it next week, but it's the decency trap. So one of the ways that Wall Street and this predatory system, which also is like DeVos and Amway and all the actual MLMs, it's the same thing. It selects for psychopathy or sociopathy. It literally, they take the worst people. They're like the frat initiation is like, yes. Will you steal from your own family? Will you bring your friends into this and then suck wealth out of them? And they're like, okay, if you're that terrible, then you're moving up. Mm-hmm. But the reason that can flourish is because the vast majority of people are not that. The vast majority of people are actually decent. They rule following, decent, probably to a fault. And so they don't believe when we're saying no, they don't care if you live or die. All they look at you as is money. They serve no function in society. They are the useless class, a parasitic class that is destroying the world. And most people are like, oh, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And you're like, no, it's not probably somewhere in the middle.
Why did I don't know. We talk about this all the time. Why did we not fall prey to that?
I don't know.
Because I feel like we're both high empathy people, but for some reason we're willing to say there's evil in the world.
Yeah, it depends on, I think first of all, you have to be lucky. You have to have a lot of support. There's a lot of stuff set up in our society to say, don't see the rough edges.
That's true.
Because if you pay attention to the rough edges around every corner, then you're not going to be able to take care of you and yours, and keep your nose to the grindstone, follow these rules, have belief that it's all going to work out. And if you don't have a ton of support, then you don't have as much ability to actually see the full picture, and take the time to try to do something about it. I want to put a pin in that one because we haven't even talked about the fact that what these greedy liars on Wall Street then do is corrupt our political system.
Which is where we were going to go to next. But before we put a pin in it, no, you, sorry. We should make this show 5 hours. All right, let's talk about the Hill.
I think Brad would have something to say about the 5 hours.
Brad, do you want to do a 5-hour show every Friday?
He's given us 2 thumbs up.
I'm sure.
You tell you. I don't want to break the news to everybody about what's going on in Washington D.C.
Oh, I
right
feel like I'm like have to tell someone they have cancer. So yeah, so fun fact, Congress didn't do anything. Is anyone shocked? So for people who do not follow this stuff obsessively like Alex and I do, you have this coronavirus relief package because as you know, there's a global pandemic, the economy crashes, but they do find the time and space in their very busy schedules to roll out trillions of dollars in stimulus money for corporations who apparently are just, didn't put enough away for a rainy day. Meanwhile, the second COVID relief package, what the Democrats passed in the House, the HEROES Act, is just been stalling in the Senate for a month and a half now. Unemployment benefits have lapsed. And a lot of people are not back to work because a lot of businesses are still closed, and the ones that have reopened are not functioning at full capacity for obvious reasons. I don't know where you guys live, but I live in Washington, D.C., and we're technically reopened, but not really. And all those people who were laid off or had their hours cut are now receiving absolutely no relief. Well, Wall Street, again, is functioning at record profits. We were just talking about this earlier in the hour. A lot of these companies are actually benefiting from this pandemic. What are your thoughts, Alex? Do you like this?
for the moment, and then the crash that we're going to see is going to be something that the magnitude has never been seen before. So today, jobs numbers came out, and it's like, oh, the economy gained 1.8 million jobs, and I'm positive the president is saying some dumb shit on Twitter about that, like strongest economy ever. That's half the jobs now that have been lost have come back. Half. So half of the jobs have come back, but that's of the largest loss of jobs in the history of this country in the course of months. The Great Depression didn't get to this level for years. This is unprecedented. And all of that is with the relief package that was passed before, with the unemployment insurance plus $600, the plus up. That is what has held the economy up, and the economy is not doing well. But the only thing that's holding it up is the relief packages, and the White House and Mitch McConnell just failed. They just said, nope, we're not going to do anything. The Democratic House passed their bill in May, and it's sat there doing nothing from May till now. And now they're like, oh, we just can't reach a deal. Why weren't they working on it since May? Why haven't they been negotiating on it since May? The failure is stunning. It's a stunning. You used a war sort of metaphor earlier, and I shy away from them sometimes, but this is a war. It's a public health war. And we know what is necessary. And it's like Congress was just like, oh yeah, they're invading the beaches, but we're going to go ahead and not do anything. Yes. We're going to check out.
Well, and I think it's really important for people to be students of history right now and realize, no, it hasn't always been this way. Sure, there's always going to be evil among us or whatever, but this is a World War II level flashpoint. And normally, when the country is exploding in on itself, the leaders have some amount of conscience with like, hey, maybe we should make sure the Nazis don't win and kill us all. And right now, the leaders are essentially saying, you know what? You guys will figure it out. We believe in you. Ingenuity.
The states can do it.
The states can do it.
And then there's some people who are like, it's probably somewhere in the middle. The Nazis aren't probably as bad as all that. It's probably somewhere in the middle.
Oh, God, you have to laugh because otherwise you lose your mind.
But I will say that it's not over. It's just they are, and everyone just needs to know what the Republicans are trying to do is take money away. They want to give no money. At least half of the Republican caucus in the Senate wants to vote against any
Mhm.
amount of increase. The Democrats in the Senate and in the House are saying 600. We want the full 600, and we want it to go all the way to 2021,
Yes.
all the way through. And the Republicans are arguing about how much less they can go, right? That's what they're trying. The reason that nothing is happening is because the Republicans, looking at the world on fire, think that the biggest problem is that workers who lost their jobs through no fault of their own might get too much support.
Yeah.
While these millionaires in Congress and their billionaire paymasters are literally, they're funneling money out the door to their corporate billionaire friends and their Wall Street billionaire paymasters at a rate that we've never seen before. $500 billion slush fund just given to Mnuchin. Just like, hey, give this to your friends, whatever. All of that happened. Now, when it comes to, hey, the American people are hurting, now the Republican senators are like, whoa, we don't want to help people too much. Then they might not be willing to rush into the burning building that we're refusing to put out.
Which,
because we
by
don't.
the way, and there have been all sorts of studies and articles about this. The idea that people have stopped applying for work is bonkers. That it's just not, it hasn't been proved. People have, in fact, still been looking to replace their jobs because guess what?
It's been disproven.
Oh, sorry. Whoops.
No, I mean, it's just like, it's worse than what you said. It's not just like we haven't seen it. We've got evidence.
Yes, because back to what you said about most people being inherently decent, most people are also inherently industrious. You don't really get, like, where are these welfare queens, this racist myth that I keep hearing about? I've
said, I mean, they all live on Wall Street. They live in corporate boardrooms and on Wall Street, and they're parasites who suck our money out and do nothing productive.
Exactly.
And there's a whole class of them, and they do exist. It's just not who Ronnie Reagan told people they were. They all drive really nice cars or have drivers who do, and they all wear really expensive suits, and it's all paid for by us.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Alex, I think we start the whole thing over, okay? Social Security work / act.tv partnership to take over Congress. How do you feel?
Perfect. I think that it is what we're trying to do.
Yes, literally.
Because that distortion effect is very real. And I've been saying this for a while, that before we have a political revolution, we need to have a media revolution. We need people to fully understand how the system actually operates to oppress us by limiting the information that we have to operate on. Because people are making calls, and, you know, it's not that people are stupid. It's people are busy, and the information that they're making their calls on is controlled, and it's controlled so that they don't have all the information. It is asymmetrical information that allows the billionaire class to just continue to rob us, and oftentimes recruits the people who they're robbing to be their cannon fodder in their fight to keep robbing.
Well, and I feel it in myself. I mean, it's why you and I talk about this all the time. A lot of political work involves psychological and spiritual work too, because of course there's this inherent desire as human beings to hope that everything's okay. Like, wouldn't it be great if the oppressors weren't actually oppressing us and they really cared about us and everything was going to work out and climate change is a hoax? Like, I will still in my thoughts be like, oh, maybe it is all not real. Maybe we're all okay. But what you have then is this very small group of villainous people capitalizing on that impulse that we all have, that hopeful, optimistic impulse that it's really not that bad, and using it to keep us in a state of literal mortal peril on multiple accounts.
Which is why
through solidarity
show and remind people that through solidarity, we have faced down things of this magnitude before. When we feel hopeless, it's important to always remember, we've seen things like this before. We've seen, oil barons and steel barons. We have private equity barons. Now the barons don't even have a commodity. It's just cash. It's giant sacks of cash. But it's the same thing. They're the oil barons, the railroad barons, all the tycoons. What they always did is they distorted the public resources directly into their pockets. There's no way that they can do it otherwise. And actually, to loop in what Peter was saying, they often did it through monopoly power. They would use the government to grant them exclusive monopoly power over some part of either the production, manufacture, distribution of something that was necessary. And then they used it to create vast fortune, which they then pumped back in to continue the government granting them the ability to do that. And it happens right up until the people stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow this anymore. And then we smash these monopolies to pieces. And then we remember, like, wow, we had all the power the whole time.
Yes.
That is where we will get to as soon as people understand the full story of how powerful we are, how all power resides in the people, and we are literally unstoppable when we stand together.
So that's what we're going to do. Stand together, be unstoppable. Two very easy things. Right?
Perfect. I think that's a perfect sign off. Be powerful, be unstoppable, and come back next week for another episode of Solidarity Live.
We love you guys. Sorry about the country.